Hi, I'm Serita Frey. I am a professor here at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm also a scientist. And one of the things that I love more than just about anything is to talk with folks about fungi. And so my research actually focuses on fungi in the environment and really trying to understand how what we do as humans impact the fungi that live here in the woods and really many parts of the world. And so actually what I have here to show you first up is a really cool mushroom that we just found. It was on the trail here. We were just walking past and we saw it. And I decided to pick it so that I could show it to you. This is an amanita or fly agaric that's the common name. And this is a really cool mushroom in our forest because right before I picked it, the underground part, the fungal hyphae, were connected to one of the trees that are here nearby where we're standing. And that mushroom, or excuse me, the part growing underground, the fungal hyphae, were transporting nutrients underground, water and nutrients from a distant part of the soil or the forest here over to the tree, and the tree in exchange was giving this fungus, this mushroom, some food in the form of sugars. And so they have this really interesting symbiotic relationship where they're each giving something to the other, something that the other one needs. So they're basically partners, if you will, in this relationship. And there are some plants, for example, pine trees, who can't survive without their fungal partner. So maybe I'll back up at this point and actually talk a little bit about how many fungi are in the soil and what actually is below ground. And actually maybe I should first talk a little bit about this above ground part. So the mushroom itself, like what is it and why do we see mushrooms popping up out of the soil, especially at this time of the year? So the mushroom, the top part, is really just the reproductive structure of the fungus, which is the main part of the organism underground. And so when conditions are right, when it's warm and moist, like it is right now, we've had a lot of rain this year, and it's warm. And so when the conditions are right, warm and moist, the fungus underground decides that it's time to send up a mushroom. And inside the mushroom, and actually I'll take the cap off, so I don't know if you can see that, but inside the mushroom are these gills. Some mushrooms have pores. There are lots of different types of structures that mushrooms have, but this one has gills, and inside those gills are little microscopic spores, and the spores are really just like seeds. They're the way that the mushroom reproduces and gets their offspring out into the world. And so, once the spores are ready, they'll drop out of the mushroom cap, and some of them might blow away and land somewhere else in the forest so that a new fungus can form, a new individual. Others, maybe an organism, maybe a mouse, will come along and eat part of this cap and eat some of the spores and then poop them out somewhere else in the forest. Like they scurry off into the woods and they poop out the spores over there somewhere, and then a new fungus will grow. Maybe a deer will eat it, or a bird, and whatnot. So that's the above ground part, but the really cool part to me is what's happening below ground, because that's the part we don't ever see. And so this is just one type of fungus, but there are many, many, many different types, and many don't even produce mushrooms, so we never see them. Many of them are even still unknown to science. And so to help you think about that, I'm actually going to set this down and just have you visualize in your mind that you're standing on the ground somewhere. Maybe you're outside the school, maybe you're in your garden, in your yard, and you draw a square foot around your feet, like just a small area, and then you go down into the soil about another foot. So you have a little cube of soil that's a foot square on each side. And if I were with you in person, and when I see you in person, maybe I'll ask you to guess how many fungi are in that soil. If you came to my lab, you could actually see how we measure that. So we actually take a little bit of soil, we put it under the microscope, we can measure the amount of fungal hyphae. So fungal hyphae are like little threads, microscopic threads that are sort of like roots in a way. They come out of the bottom of the mushroom and they spread out into the soil. These filaments or threads. So under the microscope, we can measure the length of fungal hyphae, and then we can calculate how much fungal hyphae, or what the length of fungal hyphae are in that larger block of soil. And if you do that calculation, there's something like 20,000 miles of fungal hyphae in a 1 cubic foot, 20,000 miles of fungal hyphae. Again, they're microscopic. We don't see them, but they're down there in that cube of soil. There's also probably more than 10,000 different species. And as I mentioned earlier, many of those are unknown to science. And so that's part of what I do in my research, is try to understand what fungi are in the soil and what are they doing and why are they there and what influences their ability to carry out whatever their job is. So some fungi have the job of recycling organic material. So they're going to take the leaves or the tree trunks that are in this forest, the leaves that have fallen on the ground, or a dead tree that has fallen over. The job of these fungi, the decomposer fungi, is to break these down into smaller bits and slowly recycle the nutrients that are locked away in that material. The job of other fungi, like this, the mushroom that we picked and tore apart a little bit, is to provide nutrition to trees. So as I mentioned, there is this partnership between mycorrhizal fungi and plants, and where the fungus brings nutrients to the plant and the plant gives sugars to the fungus. Other fungi have the job of being pathogens or parasites on plants or insects. So there's a whole host of different roles that fungi play in the environment. And so my job as a scientist of fungi is to really understand what these organisms are, what they're doing, and then how things like climate change, agriculture, different human activities, how we're impacting fungi in our ecosystems, and what we can do to sustain them and help them do their jobs as best they can. So just peeping out from under this log is a little purple mushroom. I think it's a Lacaria. And you might think, since it's under this log, that it's a decomposer fungus, but actually I'm pretty sure this is a mycorrhizal fungus. So it's one of those fungi that is mutualistic with the tree. That is, it's providing nutrition to the tree and the tree's providing nutrition to it. And there are different types of mycorrhizae. So this one is called ectomycorrhizae. So that means that it actually, when it comes into contact with the plant root, it actually grows on the outside of the root and in between the root cells, but it doesn't actually go into the root cells. This type of mycorrhizal fungus, the ecto, the ones that grow on the outside of the roots, they associate mostly with trees like oak trees and pine trees. And then there's another type of mycorrhizal fungus that grows inside the cells of the tree root, and those are called endomycorrhizae. And a common tree that you might know, a maple tree, those have endomycorrhizae. So different mushrooms associate with different types of trees. One of you had a question about why there are so many mushrooms, particularly at this time of year. So we're in let's see, this is the end of September in 2021. last year in 2020, during the pandemic, we had almost no mushrooms, hardly any at all. Whereas this year, they seem to be everywhere. And so you might wonder, why is that? Why some years we have so few and other years we have so many? And the answer is that, like a lot of things, fungi have certain requirements for growth, and they, in particular, if they're going to reproduce and make these fruiting structures, the mushrooms, they need certain conditions, and those conditions are usually moist and warm. And we've had a lot of rain this year. In fact, it's starting to rain right now as we're standing here or sitting here. So you might hear the rain in the background. But we've had, for the month of July, for example, we had more rain than, I think it was like the second wettest July on record. And so when it's wet and warm, mushrooms, those are the conditions that are perfect for them to produce mushrooms and send mushrooms above ground. When it's very dry, like last year, when we have a drought, they're going to wait, and they're not going to put the energy towards making their spores, effectively their seeds, until conditions are better. So you might have noticed as you're out on a mushroom hunt that there are all different types of mushrooms, different forms, different colors, different shapes. So just like plants and animals, fungi have evolved a lot of different ways to be in the world. So for example, here's a coral mushroom. Coral fungus has lots of branches, and it's very brittle. And then you have, sort of the toadstool type mushroom with a cap, and like I explained earlier, it has gills underneath. Lots of different colors and shapes. Why so many colors? Well, some mushrooms have evolved to attract insects, for example, and so bright colors is one way to do that. Some mushrooms are very stinky, and one reason that they are is that they attract flies or other insects to them by being stinky. So mushrooms are really amazing in that they've just adapted to a lot of different conditions, and they've learned, so to speak, how to take advantage of different things in their environment. So we were just walking down the path, and we came upon this rotted log, and so I turned it over. And this is actually something that I would encourage all of you to do when you're out walking in the woods, is just look around and find a rotten log and then turn it over, and you'll see all kinds of interesting things underneath. Look what I found. I found all of this cool fungal hyphae under here. These are the threads that I was talking about. You can actually see them. And maybe I'll see if I can take some of that and hold it up for you to see. So you can actually see those thread-like structures. Here they're all growing together in a mat, but they're really kind of growing through all of this. This is now part of that log that has been decomposed and is now becoming unrecognizable and is turning into soil. Yeah, so think a little bit about what would happen if we didn't have fungi. Where would this log go? It would just lay here for a really long time, right? And so logs and leaves and dead animals and all sorts of other organic debris would just pile up, and we would just be, we would be more than waist deep. We would just have lots and lots of heaps and heaps of material that never break down and that are just hanging out. And also all of those nutrients that are tied up or locked away in that material wouldn't be able to be released, so that other organisms, like the plants that are growing right now, could do their thing and could actually grow and be healthy trees. So I just wanted to point out these turkey tails. You'll see these are very common fungi that you'll see around the forest when you're out and about. You can see that these are growing on these dead logs, so these are decomposer fungi. So if you look closely here, there's some brown mushrooms growing right here on this old, well, actually this tree is still living, and that can happen. So there is some decomposition actually happening inside this living tree. And what I wanted to do here was just talk a little bit about the nutrition of fungi and how they get their food, because that is so interesting. They, first I should say that fungi are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. You know, back in the day, when we didn't know what fungi were, a lot of people thought they were actually plants, but they're not plants at all. They're their own group, their own kingdom, and more closely related to animals than plants, like I said. And what's really interesting about how they get their nutrition or their food is that they kind of do the reverse of what we do. So we actually, of course, ingest our food. We eat it, and it goes in our mouth and down our esophagus and into our stomach. And in our stomach, there are digestive enzymes that attack the food and break it down into little bits, and then we take the nutritious good parts of that in through our intestines, and it goes out throughout our body. The fungi do just the opposite of that. So they actually grow into their food source, in this case a piece of wood, for example, and they then they make digestive enzymes just like we do, but instead of doing that in a stomach, they actually make those and send them out into the environment. So they would send them out into this log, for example, and outside the fungal tissue, those enzymes break down the wood or whatever the food source is, and then the nutrients that are released are small enough pieces that the fungus can take those back up into their body. And so they're basically doing external digestion, whereas we do, you know, internal digestion in our stomach. So I thought I would just leave you today with a little bit of information or a little bit of a story about my background and how I became so interested in fungi. So I actually grew up on a dairy farm in Virginia, and I don't remember this because I was very young, and we didn't have cell phones back in that, you know, in that time. So my dad actually doesn't have pictures to prove this, but he was a farmer, and he collected soil samples to send off to a testing lab to check the soil and see if he needed to add fertilizer or whatnot. And he says that when I was 3-4 years old, I would sit next to the oven in the kitchen, and he would put soil samples from his cornfield in the oven, and I would sit there and stir those until they were dry so that we could send them off to the lab. And so I just became, I think that soil is really in my DNA. And when I went to college and learned about the microscopic life in soil, that just, it's a cliche to say that it blew my mind, but it blew my mind. And so that is why I became interested in fungi, and I just wake up every day being super excited about them and wanting to learn more. And so I think if you're excited about nature, just explore it, turn over logs, see what's out there, ask questions. Just never lose your curiosity for the natural world, and it will take you to many interesting places.